the outbreak of the First World War, the government is worried about sensitive information being leaked to the enemy.
But when the Germans started sinking American ships and American merchant...
By the summer of 1914, Europe was a continent clinging to a fragile illusion. For decades, emperors and monarchs had masked intense ethnic rivalries and an escalating arms race beneath the pageantry of Victorian high society. Military leaders, intoxicated by their own imperial grandeur, assumed that any conflict would be a swift, glorious march to victory, much like the wars of the previous century. Archduke Franz Ferdinand believed he could manage this volatility. As heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, he recognized the instability of ruling over a fractured patchwork of ethnic groups and proposed reforms to stabilize his empire. On June 28th, he arrived in the city of Sarajevo for a public tour to project royal authority. The visit immediately went wrong. A group of Serbian nationalists hurled a bomb at the royal motorcade, missing the Archduke's car, but injuring several officers in the vehicle behind them. Rather than fleeing the hostile city, Franz Ferdinand made the fateful decision to continue his public engagements and later ordered his driver to take him to the hospital to visit the wounded. What happened next was a fluke of navigation. The Archduke's driver, unaware of a sudden change in the route, took a wrong turn down a side street. Realizing his mistake, he stopped to reverse the heavy, open-top car, stalling it completely. By pure chance, the vehicle came to a halt directly in front of Gavrilo Princip, one of the original assassins. Princip stepped forward and fired 2 shots at point-blank range, killing both the Archduke and his wife. That single wrong turn activated a geopolitical doomsday machine. Austria-Hungary, outraged by the assassination of its heir, issued a set of impossible demands to Serbia and prepared for an invasion. The delicate balance of power that had kept Europe at peace was rapidly disintegrating. To ensure victory, Austria secured a promise of unconditional military support from its powerful ally, Germany. This guarantee forced Russia to mobilize in defense of its fellow Slavs in Serbia. Because of a decades-old web of secret treaties, Russia's mobilization legally obligated France to prepare its own armies, drawing the entire continent into the conflict within days. Facing enemies on 2 borders, Germany enacted the Schlieffen Plan. Their strategy was to avoid a prolonged 2-front war by swiftly invading neutral Belgium to capture Paris and knock France out of the fight before the massive Russian army could reach the eastern border. This blatant violation of Belgian neutrality forced Britain to declare war on Germany. As millions of men mobilized that August, they were sent off with immense public celebration. Crowds lined the streets to cheer on soldiers who were convinced that the fighting would be a quick, heroic adventure, firmly believing they would all be home in time for Christmas. Military commanders were equally delusional. They marched their armies into battle using the textbook tactics of the 1800s. Early in the conflict, French infantrymen were sent across open fields wearing traditional bright blue tunics and red caps, making them highly visible targets for enemy riflemen. These romantic illusions of honorable cavalry charges and colorful infantry formations were marching directly into the teeth of the Industrial Revolution. The societies that cheered in the summer of 1914 were entirely unprepared for the slaughterhouse that awaited them. The grim reality of modern conflict became clear almost immediately. An advancing soldier armed with a bolt-action rifle, capable of firing perhaps 15 rounds a minute, was now charging directly into the path of heavy machine guns. These mechanical weapons could fire up to 500 rounds a minute, instantly cutting down entire waves of infantry. This overwhelming volume of fire made traditional offensive maneuvers suicidal. Armies could no longer advance across open ground without suffering catastrophic casualties. To survive the withering barrage of bullets and shrapnel, soldiers on both sides had no choice but to dig into the earth. Unable to move forward, the opposing armies continually tried to outflank each other to the north, digging deeper fortifications as they went. This maneuver, known as the Race to the Sea, resulted in a continuous 350-mile scar of deep trenches stretching from the English Channel all the way down to the Swiss border. Inside these trenches, conditions were horrific. Heavy rains and poor drainage left men standing for days in freezing, waist-deep water. They shared their confined spaces with thousands of rats and suffered from trench foot, a condition where the skin and tissue literally rotted away from prolonged exposure to the damp cold. Above the mud, soldiers endured relentless, deafening artillery barrages. The constant concussive blasts and the pervasive fear of sudden death caused a severe psychological collapse in thousands of men, a trauma doctors at the time labeled shell shock. War was no longer a strategic contest of grand maneuvers across the countryside. It had degraded into a stagnant, claustrophobic test of endurance, where merely surviving the environment took precedence over any thoughts of military glory. To break this total deadlock, generals adopted a bleak new military doctrine: attrition. The objective of an offensive was no longer to capture strategic territory or outmaneuver the enemy. Instead, battles were deliberately designed to kill so many opposing soldiers that the enemy nation would run out of men and be forced to surrender. Attrition exacted a staggering human cost. During massive offensives like the battles of Verdun and the Somme, commanders ordered hundreds of thousands of men out of their trenches and into dense thickets of barbed wire. Entire divisions were sacrificed in a single morning, securing only a few yards of ruined ground. Desperate to break the lines, military scientists rushed new, horrifying weapons to the front. In the spring of 1915, troops watched as a dense, yellow-green cloud drifted across no man's land. Chlorine gas destroyed the respiratory systems of anyone who inhaled it, forcing armies to equip their men with crude, suffocating masks. The slaughter expanded far beyond the battlefields of Europe. Beneath the surface of the Atlantic, German U-boats began torpedoing Allied merchant ships without warning. The goal was to sever the supply chains feeding Britain, attempting to starve the island's civilian population into submission. Meanwhile, British engineers sought a mechanical solution to the trenches. They developed heavy, armored vehicles equipped with tracks to crush barbed wire and cross the devastated landscape. These early tanks were slow and prone to breaking down, but they introduced a terrifying new dimension to the battlefield. The rapid introduction of aircraft, poison gas, submarines, and tanks did not deliver a swift end to the conflict. Instead, this industrialization of warfare simply mechanized the killing, turning the Western Front into an enormous furnace that relentlessly consumed human life. By 1917, the sheer weight of this total war was fracturing the very foundations of the empires fighting it. The immense death tolls, combined with widespread starvation caused by naval blockades, pushed civilian populations and exhausted soldiers to the breaking point. The Russian Empire was the first to completely collapse. Years of devastating military defeats and severe bread shortages triggered massive strikes and protests. The Tsar was forced to abdicate, clearing the path for Vladimir Lenin's Bolshevik forces to seize control of the government and pull Russia out of the war entirely. Just as Russia withdrew, the Allies received a critical lifeline. After years of neutrality, the United States entered the conflict, deploying millions of fresh troops to a Western Front, where French and British forces were badly depleted and pushed to the verge of mutiny. Knowing they could not outlast the combined industrial might of the Allies and the Americans, Germany launched one final, massive offensive in the spring of 1918. The attack gained ground, but ultimately stalled, breaking the morale of the German army. Facing widespread naval mutinies and domestic uprisings, the Kaiser abdicated and fled into exile. When the guns finally fell silent on November 11th, there was no triumphant conquering of enemy capitals. The conflict ended because the Central Powers, hollowed out by starvation, disease, and absolute systemic exhaustion, simply collapsed under their own weight. The human toll of the First World War defied comprehension. Over 17 million soldiers and civilians were dead. Another 20 million were wounded, leaving an entire generation of young men physically maimed and psychologically scarred by their time in the trenches. In 1919, the victorious nations gathered at the Paris Peace Conference to dictate the terms of the post-war world. Through the Treaty of Versailles, they placed the full blame for the conflict on Germany, demanding crushing financial reparations and severe military restrictions from a nation that was already starving. The Allied diplomats then completely redrew the global map. They dissolved the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, partitioning the land into a fragile patchwork of new nations in Eastern Europe and drawing rigid, artificial borders across the Middle East. Rather than securing a lasting peace, the vindictive terms of the treaty laid the groundwork for future disaster. The economic humiliation and territorial losses forced upon the German people fostered a deep, lingering resentment, leaving the fractured country highly vulnerable to radical and violent new political ideologies. The Great War destroyed the ancient monarchies of Europe and buried the romantic myth of a glorious battlefield. It left behind a traumatized, deeply unstable world, one that had merely paused to catch its breath before plunging into an even greater catastrophe.